Good morning. Welcome to the second session of this morning, and what we'll try to do here is to really take a deep dive into the evidence behind a number of aspects that are related to the questions of, what can we actually do to maximize the nutritional quality of agricultural commodities. So I'm sure you've heard the discussions, does healthy soil or healthy production, healthy food, healthy people, or maybe in other words, are we actually what our food eats? So to do that, we've got three fantastic speakers, and they will share their perspectives on a number of aspects that are related to this. And the first that we will be looking at is how we might best harness the natural goodness of plants. The second one, how our choices, the choices we make on agronomic practices, how that may influence the nutritional quality of what we produce. And then finally, a perspective piece on what the technologies and approaches are that we may want to deploy not only to improve nutrition, but also at the same time food security and ensuring that the environmental footprint of what we produce is acceptable. So to start us off on that journey, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor David Stern. David is the president and CEO, as well as a faculty member of the Boyce Thompson Institute, and he's also an adjunct professor of plant biology at Cornell University. David, lectern is yours.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. It's a great honor to be here. I have to say, when I first got the invitation, I thought it was spam. And I hadn't been invited to do anything in 3 dimensions for a long time, especially at Nestlé. So it's great that that was real, and I appreciate all of the careful preparation that went on behind the scenes. And I have to say, I was given this title, Harnessing the Natural Goodness of Plants, and I said, Jeroen, Petra, can I change the title? And they said, no, you can't change it. So this is what I have to talk about. So I'm going to spend the first part of the talk trying to dissect the title. I think it's deceptive. It sounds good. It's kind of a feel-good title, but what does it really mean? And then the harnessing part is the easy. That's the technologies. And so I'll spend most of the talk on the technologies themselves. And I think am I responsible for these? Okay. All right. So harnessing the natural goodness of plants. What is natural goodness? And I think if we went around and everybody had to write 50 words on natural goodness, they'd all be different. All of our definitions would be different of natural goodness. And I think even I took one philosophy class when I was an undergraduate, and they spent the whole class trying to define the word quality. This was Socrates. Of course, I think you could spend a whole course also on either one of these words, and we only have 20 minutes. But I think one of the important points is that when we think about a term like natural goodness, we have to understand that our conception of it is influenced by the world around us, by the media, by culture, by scientists, we hope. And by the thumb that government puts on the scale. And I think without a working definition of natural goodness, we can't really harness it. We don't know what we're trying to harness. And just to give you a couple of examples, maybe obvious examples of how our definitions of things can change because of cultural influences, let's think about cigarettes. So this very well-known ad from the 1950s on the left tells us that tobacco, which is a plant, of course, is great for you as a pregnant mother, an expectant mother. And now the metaphor has changed a little bit on the right side of the screen, because now we all know, we've discovered all of a sudden that smoking maybe isn't so good for our health after all. So again, same product, same physiological effects, different. Goodness has become badness. Now when we think about GMOs, which I'll talk about a bit later on, we can paint them in many different ways. So if we look at the lower left, GMO corn seeds, normal corn seeds, in fact, the blue color is a coating of fungicide that has nothing to do with being GMO. But luckily, the normal corn seeds, you don't have to hold them with a glove. And so we should assume that the GMO seeds are toxic and we shouldn't touch them. And on the bottom right, we have 2 apples, an organic apple, which looks nice and green, a conventional one, which is sort of pale, the kind you find in a hotel lobby maybe. And the one on the left, the organic one, has a barcode, so it must be better well controlled, that we know what's going on. And there's this long list in fine print of what you don't know about that apple, the conventional apple, all of the hidden bad things that when you ate that apple that you bought into that food system that maybe didn't have your health and nutrition in mind. On the other hand, on the top right, we have an ad from the GMO apple people. So now we have this anti-browning apple, this Arctic apple that is got I'll talk about it a little bit later, but the GMO apple doesn't brown. And like, who would want that apple with that yucky brown spot in the middle? Geez, maybe you want the GMO apple this way. So how we portray things is a way of seeding cultural and personal impressions of things like what is good in an apple or in a corn seed. So what do we want to do? How do we want to use these terms maybe here at this meeting? And again, we don't have time to go through all of it, but I just want to offer a little bit of a food for thought, so to say, for each of these terms. So for example, what is goodness in terms of a nutrition meeting? Is it something that is actually good for you, that might prolong your life, that might cure cancer? Is it just something that tastes good? Is that simple definition of goodness? That apricot on the table tastes better. Probably because it's organic, but maybe not. We're talking about sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture. Is the goodness of the crop because of what? Not because of how it interacts with people, but because how it interacts with the earth. Or maybe it's just reducing the carbon footprint. So the goodness is not really, it's a derivative of the agronomic practice and has nothing to do with the food product itself. Or maybe it's about the people. Maybe because it empowers people. Maybe because a child can go to school because the crop requires less work to cultivate. So there are many different ways of thinking about goodness, and I think in the light of this meeting, and I'm sure there's people out here who have thought about it a lot harder than I have. This is spitballing, we call it in English. Now, in the natural side, I looked into dictionary definitions of natural in several languages, and the one definition that always comes out is without human intervention. Now, I don't think that is got anything to do with agriculture. Agriculture is, by definition, human intervention. So if any of you have read these books, about becoming a hunter-gatherer again and what that would, how much of your life you'd have to spend searching and eating ants and things like that, we're not talking about a natural that lacks human intervention. We must need some other definition. And so one of them, which I think is not a very serious definition, but it's often used, is something that is a crop that has no genetic engineering. That's a natural crop. So domestication somehow is not intervention, it's natural because it takes so long. Or maybe natural means that there's nothing in that food product that isn't already found in nature. It's not been contrived to produce something, maybe a micronutrient that shouldn't be in it. Maybe that makes it unnatural. Maybe it makes it healthier. Maybe it's more goodness, but less natural. Or maybe heirlooms, things that you could propagate when I have a little farm, and when we grow ground cherries, we keep the seeds because we can. They're not F1 hybrids. They're not proprietary materials that the big companies own. So maybe those are natural. Or maybe natural is just in our heads. We don't really know what it is. We don't want to know, but we'll know it when we see it. So just food for thought there. So let's think about natural as a domesticated crop, not a genetically modified crop, for just a second. And the question is really whether natural, in that sense, can provide the goodness that we all crave. And so just a couple of examples of domestication. One is corn. Now corn, as you heard in the previous talk, is the biggest grain crop in the world. It's the most important grain crop in the world. And at the top, you see the ancestor of corn, the closest ancestor that we think about in terms of domestication, which is teosinte. And you see that's an American quarter. That's 25 cents, not worth much anymore. But it shows you the size of the seed head on teosinte. There's a few seeds. They're at the top of the plant, and they're tiny. Then you have modern corn. Everybody knows what an ear of corn looks like. If you live on this planet, you've probably seen a few of them. And you see the quarter on that side looks much smaller because the ear is much larger. So corn was domesticated from Central America and Mexico, and now this crop can yield the amazing amounts per acre. I think the records are now over 400 bushels per acre, which is just a staggering amount. And at least where I live, you can't walk between the rows of corn anymore. I mean, there's no way. You couldn't get an ant between the rows of corn. So that domestication doesn't look anything like the natural plant that God might have put on earth. It looks like the one that we've messed with as humans. Another example is watermelon. So watermelon, if you see these are all natural relatives of watermelon. They're ancestors of watermelon. And none of them look terribly appetizing. Since I told you they're watermelons, you can believe me, they look more like a gourd. And you see this picture I found from an Egyptian tomb of watermelon. So this is an ancestor of watermelon. They've now been sequenced. We understand that, for example, when we domesticated watermelon, we did it for the flavor and the color and not for disease resistance. And we lost those genetic markers along the way during domestication. So this goodness, this naturalness of domestication actually threw out things that we need to spray them less as modern crops. So, there's a trade-offs, and the less you know about what you're doing, the more cost-benefit can be called into question. And so here we have these yucky, inedible melons that have been domesticated now into the ones that are really enjoyed around the world. And if you look for pictures of watermelon, you can find somebody from every culture in every country just biting into these watermelons. Now, I sell watermelons in the farmer's market, and nobody wants them with seeds anymore, but you see that one woman's eating the seedless. Everybody else is eating the old ones. You had the seed spitting contest at the country fair. It was a great thing. But this poor kid on the left, he's stuck with the old watermelon. It doesn't taste very good. But that took a long time. Those Egyptian tombs weren't built, in the last century. They were built many, millennia ago. And so how do we get to something which is good, and maybe somewhat natural without spending the thousands of years? We heard in the previous talk, we don't have time. We can't waste time. We have to get to work. And so what I want to spend the rest of the talk doing is making sure that we have some shared knowledge of what these genetic modification technologies are. And I'll leave it to everybody else to decide if they should be used or not, but they're tools, as was mentioned in the previous talk, that we may choose to leave lock in a drawer. I personally think the genie's pretty far out of the bottle, and I'll give some examples of that. So first, just a little bit of vocabulary. So if we want to call a wild or undomesticated ancestral species, it has a genetic code. This plant carries the existing genetic code. When we think about a transgenic plant or a GMO in the original sense of the word, there's a new trait in it. So there's a gene, maybe the gene's from bacteria, maybe it's from another plant, maybe it's from anything really. It could be a newly synthesized gene these days. So it has something new that's interrupting the original genetic code, and this is why it's sometimes called unnatural, because this thing is not found in nature and never will be found in nature, until it escapes, of course. And then we have the new technology, which is sometimes called CRISPR. It's gene editing. There are different forms of gene editing. That field is evolving very quickly. But here, we've made some more precise changes to the letters of the genetic code. So we're doing something that is within the realm of possibility. This could happen through domestication. This could happen, and it's a very narrow, precise change. It's not throwing a new gene into a plant. So some people think gene editing is more natural than gene insertion, which is the GMO line on this slide. So that's gene editing. And then lastly, but not least, we have plant breeding. So this is a really oversimplified example, but let's just imagine this is a hybrid. So we took a red plant and a black plant. We crossed them together, and this is the baby. The baby's half red and half black. And somewhere in that black and red lettering is a new combination that we actually wanted. Maybe it's a good tasting watermelon with disease resistance, but we brought along all the other baggage from the red and the black plants, and we have to sort that out through a decade or more of breeding to get the variety we wanted. And this is what humans have been doing for thousands of years, is perfecting plants by finding the product, the thing that they wanted, and then propagating that, crossing it again and crossing it again. So it has advantages, as I'll speak to in a minute, but also it is a more time-consuming occupation. So I'm going to go through just a couple of examples of GMOs, then gene-edited, and then plant breeding, just to give a feel for these. The first generation GMOs are the ones that, again, were and maybe still are the most controversial perhaps because they were commodities, a big footprint developed by big ag. There's all of the ownership, the corporate ownership, the suing farmers when the pollen blew on their fields. There's all sorts of missteps that big ag made in these areas. But there was a benefit to the producers, the farmers, and the corporations, profit, right? The farmers adopted these things at a very, very high level. So you can say they're bad for humanity, but that's not what the farmers thought. The farmers have adopted them. So the public didn't really like them, but of course, corn is hidden in foods. Who eats GMO sweet corn? A few people do, but mostly it's the starch, it's all the derivatives of corn, it's the animal feed that's made with GMO corn. And so by the time it gets to the person, what do they know? I mean, the gene isn't in there anymore anyway. So now we're into these next generations of GMOs. So I just put a couple of logos on the bottom, and these have many, many, many genes in them. Sometimes they'll have 10 or more genes. They'll have a drought trait, they'll have an insect resistance trait, they'll have an herbicide, or maybe 2 or 3 herbicide resistant traits. And there is bad things about this, to be sure. But, you know, when the National Academy studied GMOs versus conventional agriculture, for example, for herbicide issues, herbicide tolerance, you know, emergence of resistant weeds, it would have happened with quote-unquote conventional agriculture too. So the trade-off, you know, GMOs gives you one set of problems, conventional ag gives you another. If you're doing large monocropping, you're going to have environmental impacts, you're going to have resistance, and all of those other things. And of course, the GMO has been used as a way to sell foods that aren't GMO. So you'll see a bottle of water that says no GMO in it or no gluten. And you know, there's a lot of, I think, kind of disingenuous advertising. As scientists, I walk through the grocery store, you know, with my head like that. And then, of course, you know, this little, this is from Switzerland, I think, this little no sign saying, well, if we're going to engineer corn, we're clearly going to be engineering babies next. And of course, they were right about that. And I think we might want to worry a little more about the engineering of the babies than the engineering of the corn. So certainly the genie is out of the bottle, and I think, you know, the designer children of the future may not be as far away as we think. It's a scary thought, but you know, the ethical issues as genetic modification is crossed over from plants into humans is profound. The second generation GMOs are maybe a little more savvy. I mentioned the apples already. So that just has a genetic modification that impedes a gene that causes apples to brown. And so you can buy these things, put them in your kid's lunch, and they won't turn brown. The one on the upper right is brinjal eggplant. So that's a well-known example that just passed regulatory approval recently, and the farmers are adopting it and started in Bangladesh. The Gates Foundation supported a lot of that. And again, farmers in Bangladesh don't have the protection from pesticides and so on that we assume in the first world. So again, I'll leave others who know more about this to talk about it, but I think it's a better example than GMO corn. And then at the bottom is the pineapples. So these pineapples, you can get them at the store in my town. They're $12 a piece. People still buy them. But they are modified to be a consumer-friendly trait. This healthy pineapple, because it's pinker, it must be better for me. It's got a little more lycopene, and I can accept this as a consumer. So a consumer-friendly trait, there's no money in it for the company, but it starts to create an impression that maybe GMOs aren't all bad after all, if you look at it in that way. Of course, scientists are maybe not a little more skeptical, and some of the public is as well. Then we have gene editing, and as far as I know, there's only 2 gene-edited plant products on the market. One of them is this high GABA tomato, which is marketed in Japan. So GABA in Japan is thought, in the Japanese culture, is thought to be something that lifts your mind, right? So this tomato is flying through the sky, and if you may not be necessarily smarter, but you'd be happier, less stressed out. That's good, right? So this is a consumer-friendly trait. And then this oil, the soybean oil that went on sale through it's not CRISPR, but it's a different gene editing technique. It was actually, nobody has admitted to using it, but it is being used in deep fat fryers in the Midwest, for example, because it makes healthier French fries. It sounds like an oxymoron, I know, but you know, again, trying to improve diet, but in a stealth way, because we don't want to mention, by the way, that this product was made using gene editing. And yes, you could make these things through plant breeding, maybe slowly, and maybe not very efficiently, but it's possible. And then lastly, we have advanced breeding. Advanced breeding is not traditional plant breeding. The Mendelian breeding and the Mendelian traits we're familiar with on the upper right. One gene causes wrinkling around peas or green or brown peas, but a complex trait like nodulation, like making a legume out of something that isn't, requires hundreds of genes. And really, you can't do that through gene editing. You can't do it through GMOs, at least not very quickly. And so breeding is always going to have a place for this. And as was mentioned in the previous talk, farmers now have access to cell phone data. This cassava project, which is partly at Boyce Thompson Institute, has delivered a lot of varieties through conventional breeding, but it's marker assisted. They use the knowledge of the genome, all the genes in the plant, and they're able to do, I think, a better job of responding to local needs. These things are compatible with existing agronomic practices, and they don't have the intellectual property traps that CRISPR technology has, that GMO technology has. So all of these are tools. Whether we use them and how we use them is, again, for the community to decide. So in the last 2 slides, I want to just talk about the future, perhaps. What might the future hold? This is just crazy speculation. For one thing, science has changed a lot. When I started, it was hypothesis. You test the hypothesis, you were wrong, you'd make a new hypothesis, and it was sort of that circle. But now we have data. And so, we discover a trait through high throughput phenotyping, for example. We look at lots of examples, we sequence lots of genomes, and we crunch it through artificial intelligence, machine learning, and we're able better to predict the performance, whether it's through breeding or GMO or for gene editing, and then we can reduce it to practice. So in principle, the pipeline of science, how we can produce new traits and integrate them into crops is much improved. The potential is huge, but it's the big data issue is also a huge problem. We have, so much information, and how do we use it? If we believe everything a computer tells us, we probably go wrong. So there is a lot of learning to do here, the interface between the bench science, the field science, and the big data science. Those barriers are still there in some cases. But I think we can have a bigger vision, and we have to have a bigger vision of what we can do. And I've got a few keywords here. Discovery is easier now of the components of food. We have higher throughput, less invasive technologies. We can rewire plants. It's amazing what we can think of, putting a new chromosome in, taking a chromosome out. And we can also perhaps improve our sequestration of carbon. It's a very complicated field. Perhaps we can create perennialization of crops where it doesn't exist. Perhaps we can recruit nitrogen-fixing bacteria to plants that don't colonize them presently. And again, the improvements that are already existing but need to be much improved in artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then farming itself is really changing, as was mentioned also. Original farming, the combine and the tractor. Now we have indoor farming, we have vertical agriculture. That sector is still very new. I don't think it's very profitable. And then we have meat in a dish. We have artificial meat, which is highly processed. We have meat in a dish, which is, you don't have to put it on my plate. I'll eat less meat. But, I think it harkens back to that handful of GMO corn seeds. What is society going to accept in order to, sort of save ourselves from ourselves? And lastly, I just want to reflect again, these are things I'm sure will come up in other talks. The scientists can't stay in an ivory tower. Scientists can't stay in silos. Science is for everybody. So we have to ask questions about what we're doing that are beyond sort of, can I change the character of this plant? Can I change the character of this fruit? Is it just a game I'm playing? Is it scalable? Is this going to be affordable? Is it durable, sustainable? And all of the other questions that are really tough ones, but they require collaboration far outside of science with economists, the social scientists, and all of the end users. And so I think, if entrepreneurs can plug into this technology, if we can spread the ability to create new and sustainable products, all of us will benefit. And so I think I'm going to end there, and I hope it stokes a few questions and arguments in your minds, and look forward to bringing those up in the panel session.
What I'd like to do now is give the lectern to Professor Sieglinde Snapp. Sieg is from the 1CGIAR International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center that has already been mentioned, and she is the program director for the Sustainable Agri-Food Systems program. And Sieg will give us her insights on the implication of different agronomic practices on nutritional quality. Sieg, lectern is yours.
Thank you so much. I think it's a great time to be an agronomist. I don't know about you, but there's some challenges about getting older. But one of them, exciting things, is sometimes your passions become a household word. Who would have thought soil health would ever become a thing? And yet it has. And Nestlé now has Agricultural Science Division. Yeah. It used to be you would see wonderful lectures about agriculture by the ecologists. I love them dearly. They're some of my best friends. But actually agronomists have something to contribute. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. So I am from CIMMYT. We are the original Green Revolution. As we saw, the wheat has gone from really tall wheat to very short-statured wheat, which I think has been a great thing for the world. But as Sir Gordon Conway has challenged us, we need to have a double Green Revolution now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about agronomy as one small piece of that. So as we know, the world has many challenges these days, but these are also opportunities. I'm also an optimist, and we have been told in the past that doom and gloom, and yet we actually are seeing the world. And Kenya, for example, has come up today, is leading the way in terms of certain aspects of how we can bring it back to the agronomists, the original agronomists, the women farming out there around in Africa, and their farm families, right, and their husbands. So these global challenges, agronomy is part of this, but agronomy in the bigger sense, including genetics, as we just heard. So sustainable ag-food systems indeed are founded on soil nutrition, on human and plant nutrition. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the evidence around agronomy and plant nutritional quality, because I think there are investments that need to be made. And where do we make those investments, right? So first, again, as the earlier speaker did, we need to go back to these definitions. Nutritional quality. It makes me remember the arguments about soil quality. Even that was seen as a little bit suspect among soil scientists back in the day, right? Now we talk all just broadly about soil health, but in those days, even soil quality was seen as a bit too fuzzy, not quantitative enough. And yet, nutritional quality is essential to all of us. And so we are going to boldly go into that. Here, I'm very excited about the next few days, where we're learning more about nutritional quality in terms of both nutrients and phytochemistry. So agronomy and plant nutrients are indeed some of the foundation. As agronomists, we try to improve nutritional quality, right, in terms of increasing yields. So I want to just point out that actually we have to think about plant genetics, because in agronomy, we're trying to increase our yields. And if you increase quantity, you also increase quality. And so we always make sure there's enough nutrients there. Whether you're organic or regenerative or conventional farmer, you have to have enough nutrients there to improve the quantity, and therefore you improve the quality there. So genetics, really we have to come back to the right varieties, are a very important part of this. And as a farmer, as an agronomist, you choose both varieties and your soil nutrient. So organic and conventional soil management, in the end, although we hear about the exceptions, and I'll talk a little bit about them, right, that we get there in the end, right? We try to make sure that you have enough nutrition. So other than nitrogen, in most cases, you both achieve similar nutrient content. And I did had some of my scientists help me with some very in-depth analysis of literature. And it's very rare that you find a difference between organic management and inorganic, because other than the fact that organic tends to be a little bit more stressed plants, and you have different varieties, which tends to give you a little bit higher protein content just because your plant is stressed, so the cells are a bit smaller. But I'll come back to that in a minute. So I did want to point out that we have gotten there through both conventional and latest molecular biology to more biofortified approaches. So we have varieties that increase zinc, increase iron, and these are being used in developed and developing parts of the world. So again, your crop choice is very important in agronomy. And basically, we're talking about more holistic approaches, and I'm going to come back to that in the end, that we need to see, as we see here today, people working in the agronomy, people working on nudging consumer behavior. It has to be the whole village. Everyone has to be at the table, because alone, varieties aren't enough. Alone, we have to have that diversity, I would say. So here is just one of the studies showing that agronomy does matter in the sense that you can increase your protein, in this case, through mineral fertilizers. And this work, of course, is becoming more important than ever as fertilizers are becoming so dear, so expensive. And so we need to have enough nitrogen available. Cereals require massive amounts of nitrogen. They're nitrophilic. You cannot get the calories without that nitrogen. So it's not as simple as saying we'll replace it with organic. And organic sources often, as you'll see, don't have quite as high protein. But sometimes they concentrate it. So in terms of per each cell, they'll be higher, the content. Your concentration goes up. But in terms of how much is in the entire field, will a lot depend on having sufficient mineral nutrition. But this has been shown to sometimes have a negative. Having excess nitrates, for example, can be negative. So it's basically, it depends, as we always say in agronomy, which gets us in trouble with scientists. They want a simple silver bullet answer, but it really does depend. And as you can see, the irrigation also matters. So your context, how fast the plant grows. If they have big cells, then they're going to have slightly diluted nutrients. But overall, in terms of the plants. And also another really, actually to me, exciting point is that as protein goes up, often your zinc and your iron content will also go up. From a meta-analysis, we're seeing this. So as you improve your protein, which we need for bread quality in wheat, you also start to see more zinc and iron. So it's not as simple as just biofortification alone. We have to have the nutrition there as well. So your first part, you get there through picking the right varieties. But then, if you have your nutrition there in terms of making sure there's enough nitrogen, and I think more and more we're moving towards both organic and inorganic, integrated nutrient management, which shouldn't be a revelation, but it is in a lot of circles. We do need to have both in order to increase both your iron and zinc, but also in terms of your protein. So agronomic effects are indeed complex, but plant genetics, we have to come back to that because overall, your soil nutrition has really modest effects. There are a few differences, again, between organic and conventional management. If you look, you can find a few, and they tend to get splashed all over the news. But in fact, because organic farmers also need to produce enough yield, they tend to have similar effects overall. There are exceptions when we start talking phytochemistry. Certain nutrients, such as potassium, are very important for apple flavonoids. Not surprisingly, sulfur is very important when we come to organosulfurs, such as in the brassicas, right? So there are certainly nutritional effects on phytochemistry, as you would expect. But overall, it has to be the combination of genetics plus the agronomic management. So one of the big exceptions in a few cases, organic agriculture has been shown to increase your vitamin C. And this is partly, again, because of nutrient stress. Organic agriculture relies on slower nutrient release and slightly stressed plants, which can increase taste, right? Because then you have a little more sugar per each, in terms of percentage, right? Proportionally less water, right? So yes, we can, in organic agriculture, we can often increase the taste, but you can also do that through genetics. So the combination is what gives us an increase in vitamin C in a lot of organic managed systems, using this example of strawberries. So it's the combination of genetics and moderate stress from slowly released nutrients. You can also achieve this through integrated nutrient management, right? It just depends on your goal. If you're trying to slightly stress plants, in conventional agriculture, we have a lot gone for the highest yield, right? And as highest yield will sometimes be high calories, which we need for the world, but it also means sometimes there's been a sacrifice in terms of not quite as stressed plants. And so basically we're buffering and using a lot of fertilizer. So now we need to come to a more, I think, nuanced approach where it depends where you are in the world. Places like Africa, you may in fact need to make sure you have inorganic nutrients and fertilizers, because there's just not very small land holdings, right? But in areas such as some parts of Asia, we're using excess amounts because of the subsidies and because of the current context. Farmers always, I think, make logical decisions, but given their context, they're using large amounts of fertilizer. Then they make sure they get enough calories produced, but it's not good for the environment. So it depends where you are in the world, what are the right solutions where. So finally, I want to come to an example of that has been one of the most important in terms of seeing quality and micronutrients where they matter. And so in zinc in Ethiopia, recent work has shown that agronomy does matter, because the soils, in terms of the soil parent material, varies depending where you are on the planet. In some places, inherently, soil is lower in zinc. In those cases, we have to make sure there is enough sufficient zinc. And you might think, oh, we'll just add zinc fertilizer. But it's not actually quite that simple. You have to both make sure you have the biofortified crops and judiciously making sure the right fertilizers are there. And manure can also play, so organic and integrated approaches. And this has been important to increase the zinc in children through these combined approaches. So agronomy in its bigger sense, including genetics, including soil management, has made a difference here. But it's not that simple, too. You also need to be thinking about dietary diversity, as I'll get to in a minute. So this shows you that in some cases, there is a soil health, plant health, human health connection. But bioavailability matters as well. And this is actually an exception. I'm going to show it because I think it's important to show these linkages occur. But in many cases, it's just about making sure that people have diverse diets so that they get enough zinc. Versus in these very specific places in Ethiopia and in Malawi, you do see where the soil parent material has influenced the plant material, which in turn has influenced human health. And I should also point out that big data is a big part of this. Understanding these big trends, rather than just looking in a few specific locations, long-term experiments at a few sites, that I think in agronomy, this generation of agronomists are embracing big data, which is very important because we need to see what are the big trends, not just what happens in very controlled. Science generally, I think, needs to move beyond, at least for applied sciences, move beyond very specific examples where you control a few elements and then see what happens, to more participatory approaches where we include consumers and more big data approaches so we can see what are the big trends. So agronomy has really changed in terms of we're no longer just working on a few fields, and we're moving into more of a modern role. But it's not just about drones, it's also about using these analytics. I think it's very important. So in terms of zinc, genetics and soil management both can, of course, improve zinc nutrition. And zinc biofortified crops have been successfully bred in beans and wheat, but it's not enough to breed them. We have to actually make sure that now, I think we'll hear from the next speaker a bit about this in terms of we need to improve the seed systems so that they're available, improve the nutrition education so that people are interested in these varieties, make sure that the varieties have the consumer traits. It's not enough, some of the, we saw the exciting, orange-fleshed sweet potato, but in many places that's still not culturally acceptable. So you have to have the whole package, and we have to work together as agronomists across the disciplines in order to do translational research that makes a difference in the world. So we're also using zinc-coated urea and other types of fertilizers now to improve zinc nutrition. So we do see soil-plant-human linkages in terms of zinc for humans. But overall, I would say for nutrition, we have to think about diversity as being essential. And so village level studies have shown that there are very positive correlations. If crops are diverse, often you move towards more diverse diets and child nutrition security, which is what we're all about. One of the big challenges is that the world is going to simplified systems, and yet we know that the environment, that human health needs these diverse systems. So that's one of the big challenges that face us today, I believe. But it is, again, great that agriculture is back at the table, because I think I've always wondered why agronomists have not been at the table in a lot of these discussions. And I think it's partly because humans have tried to get off the farm. It's where the drudgery has been. And yet now we hope that we see these opportunities for youth, for women, to be part of more public-private partnerships, entrepreneurship, so that we can use science for promoting diversity in designed ways, in functional ways, to make sure that we get the nutritional outcomes. But also so that there's income opportunities, and that, as I said, environment can benefit from diversity. But it sounds great to talk about dietary diversity giving us nutritional outcomes, but I think today we're going to be hearing a bit more about some of the complexities that are involved in this, including the availability. So in summary, organic and conventional management show modest differences. I think it's a false argument to talk about organic versus conventional myself, because most farmers that I've worked with, they move towards organic when it's necessary for the profit and for their personal family survival. In parts of the US where it's very difficult in conventional, if you're a smaller size farmer, unless you have higher value, and so organic gives them higher value. But they know, the farmers that I work with, whether in Africa or in Michigan or in Mexico, that in fact they need a range of options. They need different tools. And they need different varieties if they're able to address the challenges. And we need to empower them, because most solutions are local and are nuanced. And so you have to empower farmers. And giving them new options, like the biofortified crops, really shows how you can combine genetic and agronomic nutritional management. If we broaden those options, rather than restrict them and say you can only use organic here or only use conventional here, I think those are really false divides. So for sustainable agri-food systems, we do need these agronomic management options like zinc fertilization. We do need biofortification, and we do need a diversity of cropping systems and diet, which is one of the bigger challenges. But I am encouraged that we are now moving into an era of public, private, and civil society partnerships. Because from all my 3 decades working in Africa, I've just seen that in the end, you have to get there together, because sitting in your academic ivory tower doesn't bring translational goods for the world. And diversifying these options is what farmers need. We shouldn't be telling them that they can't use organic agriculture or they can't use conventional agriculture. We need to provide more options. So I appreciate, again, this opportunity to talk a bit about agronomic practices, which I do think are part of the solution, but only if we think of agronomy as very broad, including crop diversification. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and I really want to apologize for not being able to join you physically in this meeting, because many of these meetings also provide lots of opportunities for us to learn from each other. Having listened to the first 2 presentations, where lots of science has been presented, but also the interface in what we in the work that is happening on the science world with agronomy. I just wanted to look at this from a last mile perspective, but also put on a little bit of the policy part that impacts decisions that get made in the food system, but also decisions that get made from a nutrition perspective. so that I can bring that angle to the table. So let's go through the slides. In Africa, we are working with Nestlé to get young people to engage in agricultural value chains, really to solve two problems. Africa has a very youthful population that if they engage in the agricultural sector would really be a huge opportunity, but also then to provide market for farmers, which we really are looking and hoping that many businesses, many people in this type of industry see the opportunity to link with the communities that are producing on the ground, thus actually enhancing their own livelihoods. Next slide. I just, talking about all that though, I wanted to go back to what we did last year together. Many of you were engaged and really just talk about again the opportunity that we saw coming out of the Food System Summit and what it left with us. Clearly, nutrition and the role of businesses that are participating in ensuring that nutrition becomes available was very well highlighted, but also the participation was huge. Whether it is in all these areas that we had highlighted under the 5 action tracks that came through during the Food System Summit, there are opportunities that are beginning to emerge, and there are opportunities that we should be doubling down on innovations, on new technologies that we can take forwards, but also on engaging different parts of the world that we can take forward and be part of enhancing how nutrition becomes available to people. I'll not go through all of them because you already know them, but I just wanted to highlight the progress since. And the next slide does talk about some of the things we are doing from a progress perspective. What we really try to focus on here, at least from where I'm sitting, is recognizing that governments that came to the table in the Food System Summit actually have a central role to play, and helping them understand the balance between the different parts of the food system and really not get overwhelmed, but just picking a few things. One of them being nutrition, the other being environmental issues, the other being food security, and ensuring that they are designing programs, that they're having national dialogues that are talking about these issues, that are identifying places of weakness from a nutrition perspective. Who's most vulnerable? Who needs what support? But also what type of investments need to happen in these areas, and how do we structure those investments? So we are working with them. We saw 48 African countries step forward with national pathways. We followed up with them, and next week at the AGRF, which is part of the reason I'm not in this meeting today, next week at the AGRF, we will see many countries stepping forward, but just to mention that we have 3 or 4 countries already that are actually developing their food pathways and really showing areas where investments can happen. And some early birds included Rwanda, Malawi, Ghana, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania. They are not yet here on this graph, but these are some of the countries that are coming to Rwanda next week to talk about their plans. In addition to that, we are working with the African Union and NEPAD to really ensure that these frameworks become available at country level, that we can also have an opportunity to compare like for like. As countries are designing these programs, what are the best things that must be in there? Access to nutrition and healthy diets, environmental impact of the agricultural sector, of course, dealing with the issue of food security and hunger, and a few others. But really, what are the basic things that each of those must have so that we can be able, at some point, be able to assess the progress we're doing? Next slide. So because that is anchored, next slide, please. Yeah. Because again, we can't, the reason I'm bringing all this out is for you all is, I mean, Africa still carries between Africa and Asia, we still are responsible for 90% of children stunting. The global children stunting, if I might call it that, is sitting between Africa and parts of Asia. So without going through all these numbers, the imperative for us, the need to develop food systems, the need to recognize the centrality of nutrition and healthy diets in food systems, where we are seeing increasing obesity, of course, of children and other people happening, now Africa being one of the continents where that is happening fastest. The imperative to focus on healthy food, the imperative to focus on nutrition becomes extremely important. And of course, the need to ensure that people are accessing health diets becomes important. Next slide. I will not go through this again, but really just to help you understand that as these challenges in nutrition and access to food become important, so do the challenges of poverty. Most of these populations are living in agriculture. The more the sector doesn't perform, the more we see food security increasing, nutritional security increasing. But so the truth is, poverty levels increase behind all that because these people also are having challenges of accessing resources. And that's, again, the reason for me linking what businesses do to tapping into the opportunities of people living in farming, like smallholder farming, and providing opportunities in smallholder farming is an extremely important part of what businesses like Nestlé get to do, sourcing in ways that has the ability to impact nutrition, but also to impact poverty in these communities is something that we definitely look forward to. Next slide. This was talked about earlier, but I just wanted to mention that as a result of COVID-19 and many other challenges, of course, the challenge, we've seen increasing vulnerability and increasing inability to access healthy food. So with the health food now being over 60% more expensive than ordinary food, and probably even more expensive than unhealthy food, if I might call it that. So the challenges that we have going forward, I think the previous speaker talked about how we are living in interesting times. These interesting times need to define how we go forward. And I think being able to really find the opportunities and technologies and innovation that can help us improve access to better food and with a focus on nutrition is extremely important. Next slide. So this has also been mentioned by the previous speaker, so I'll not go into it in detail. Here, we're just trying to say that Africa's challenge of access to food has a number of backgrounds. Some of that is location specific, and the previous speaker has talked about it. You find in parts of Malawi, for example, you find some nutrients available, some nutrients are not available. And the technologies that will be deployed are going to be based on what is available to people in Ethiopia, in Malawi, but also in other parts of the world. I mean, in other parts of Africa, depending on what the soils are offering them. Next slide. Some of the innovations that we've seen that are beginning to give the biggest opportunity for these communities that live in farming and for these communities that live in rural Africa. Breeding, Agro puts a lot of emphasis in taking forward the work of the CGIR through building faster downstream delivery, faster link to private sector, strengthening small SMEs to take advantage of the work that is coming out of the CGIR, but also then the opportunity that comes through blends of fertilizers and ensuring that elements like zinc that were being talked about in the previous slide can actually become available to farmers through ensuring that businesses are being built around blends. And we are seeing blending facilities in Rwanda that are focusing on that, blending facilities in Kenya, blending facilities in Uganda. And many of these are becoming increasingly available and increasingly important. I think for me, the most important part of this is really, again, being able to do two things. Through blends, we are able to pay attention to the plant needs and how those plants get to give more to farmers. So, for example, in some parts of Africa, for maize, we've been stuck at about two metric tons per hectare. But we can move from 2 metric tons per hectare to 5 metric tons per hectare. And IFDC has done a lot of work on this by just tweaking the microelements available to that plant and ensuring that through blending, these microelements become available to the plant. And again, so I keep sometimes telling people that it looks like whatever you do, unless you figure out the right microelement, you're going to be at 2 metric tons per hectare if that microelement is the limiting factor. So These are opportunities that are beginning to be sought through working with institutions that are working on these areas. And again, we as AGRA are really focused on creating that ecosystem on the ground, ensuring that universities that we work with, national research systems that we work with have done those local testings, and these things can become available on local markets through local businesses, and there's a policy environment that protects those businesses and ensures that they work. In terms of also breeding, ensuring that all the varieties that the CGR is putting out that are extremely rich in nutrients are offering new opportunities in terms of resilience get to the ground. One of the things that I've learned in this area of trying to advance seed systems and ensuring that we get these improvements in technologies to farmers is just being able to understand where the system is broken, just being able to not look at breeding, but look at the whole system from the scientist. When the variety is becoming available at the country level, from the nurse to the farmer, where the system gets broken. And sometimes it's amazing some of these places and small things that really prevent things from moving forward, but also big things like lack of a regulatory environment that can ensure that once the seed variety is out there, the businesses, the SMEs that are doing it, once they're able to do it right, that they actually have a regulatory environment that allows them to work and be able to move this as a business that they can profit from and be able to repeat serve farmers. That is an extremely important part of what we do. So we really look at once the things are delivered to NAS, then how quickly can farmers access them, and then really try to work on those areas and ensure that we are reducing the length of the last mile and ensuring that technologies, whether it is fertilizers or seeds, get to farmers faster, whether it requires policy changes, whether it requires a business environment, whether it requires an extra business that was absent. So many times I tell people that in Africa and many other places, I guess, where in rural areas, you can't assume that there will be a business to deliver on services, in a particular service. In many cases, those businesses get created, those businesses get nudged forward, those businesses start very small and they have to be moved forward. But they are good models to learn from, and we've been trying to learn from some of those good models. And I keep telling people that how come Coca-Cola gets to every village in Africa? Can we learn from how they managed to actually get their products to every village and get them there in ways that communities in rural areas can afford them? How do we do that for things that can move nutrition forward for farmers? And really talking about nutrition in particular, and something that I'm not talking about here, but I really wanted to highlight, things like packaging and nutrition become extremely expensive. You know, how available is different types of food? When we do figure out what to do, how available are they to communities that need them in terms of cost, in terms of access, but also in terms of cost? These are some of the things that we need to think about. So next slide. The other opportunity, of course, sits in diversification. And again, I'm not going to go into the science of it because this has been mentioned and there's a whole lot of work around this. But one of the things that really amazed me is how, for example, some of the local vegetables here in Rwanda have 40 times as much calcium as some of the vegetables that have become popular because of market demand. And many of those vegetables are dying out because there's no market demand. So really ensuring that from a technology perspective, from a breeding perspective, we bring these things in the mainstream. We ensure that we are also finding ways of enhancing their availability. So our food system has narrowed a lot and really focused on a few foods that are easier to do maybe, or that have been processed and moved forward in a certain way. And maybe it is time to step back and ask about the value of crops like millet. I remember last year at the AGRF, the head of state was asking how we could demaize, as he called it, demaize the country. by reintroducing commodities like millet, indigenous commodities like millet, that do have value, but because there's not been a lot of work that has advanced the place and value of millet from a technology perspective and found new products in millet. Millet has been abandoned and many other commodities have been abandoned. So there's an opportunity for companies like Nestlé that are looking at that do put products on our table to really go back and work with us on some of these products that could be a game changer. But there are also other products that are already available. In Rwanda here, when the iron fortified bean became available as a result of the work that Harvest Plus and the CGI is doing, we put a policy in place to actually ensure that every farmer has access to iron fortified bean. As a result, we actually have more than 35% of Rwandan households using iron fortified beans. So the link between technology and policy there becomes extremely important because, again, as the previous speaker was saying, some of these technologies become available, but they sit on the shelf and take forever to add value to what we're doing. So there's an opportunity. If the opportunity is not coming from the value addition and the processing we are doing, there's an opportunity through policy when we do understand what these commodities hold, what these technologies are offering, to actually move them forward and make them, largely available to a larger part of the population and be part of solving the problem of nutrition. Next slide. I'm not going to go into those. The value was very clear and was mentioned. Next slide. Here I'm talking about what is at stake and what we're up against. And again, I mentioned that most of this, and here maybe the only thing I could highlight is smallholder farming is also a threat to biodiversity as well. I mean, as farmers get into a place where they need to produce the most they can with the pieces of land they have, there are opportunities for us to rethink what type of varieties, what type of breeds, what type of technology, what type of new ways of agronomy and new ways of doing business. Again, talking about innovation that would enhance how smallholder farmers work. But I also wanted to mention that from the food crisis that we just had, we are living through, there's an opportunity again to double down on the marketability of some of these products so that we don't have global products that really become the way we do business, as opposed to environmental friendly, locally available, and locally available is talked about a lot, solutions that can be advanced. So again, challenges both to policymakers, but also to the industry to think about how this can be of value. Next slide. Here I had talked about what Agro does. We really focus on ensuring that the last mile does work. When extension is the limiting factor, we do invest in that. But mostly our work focuses on seed systems from a perspective of bridging the last mile to the farmer, taking the work of the CGIR to the farmer so that it can be delivered faster, and ensure that there's an ecosystem that can deliver that. Same thing with fertilizers. We really don't work on the fertilizer sector as such, but we want to make sure that there's a fertilizer ecosystem that can deliver the right inputs to farmers at a local level. And then we also look at marketing issues, and we are increasingly paying attention to quality issues, because we do understand that there are a number of things that are holding the markets back. And we've made investments in supporting, again, the work of IIT and the CGIR in aflatoxins here in Rwanda. We have huge opportunity that has presented itself with the Africa Improved Food, where just by dealing with the challenge of aflatoxins and investing in aflatoxins with IIT, Africa Improved Food buys now is able to buy from one and smallholder farmers. So the kind of stuff you would really hope to see happening in the field. Let me go to my last slide, just to cut the long story short. So the last slide, next slide, after the really last slide, the second to this. This one from here, really, no, not thank you. Here, this one. Here, I guess really the most important part for me is that as we focus on bridging the last mile, the consumer is a very important part of the last mile, and the very important part dealing with poverty, dealing with nutrition and all this. And it all really depends on the type of technologies that we design to make food available to consumers and really support consumers in the type of choices they are making. I feel like we've made a few advances, we've put a few things on the market, and we are working with those. I think there's room there to really do more, to put a few more products that do recognize the diversity on the ground, products that can help enhance diversity on the ground in many of these countries. We do definitely need to improve health thinking, health investments, and also encourage countries to think about prioritizing health and diets in their food systems, which is what we are doing at this year's AGRF. We'll be doing a whole lot of that. In our agro strategy, for example, we've put in nutrition, something we hadn't done in the past. We've put in nutrition and sustainable farming, also something we hadn't done in the past, recognizing that farming sustainably, prioritizing diversity, and prioritizing nutrition are going to have to be an important part of where the world goes. And again, here, really finding those technologies to boost that. And then building capacities and strengthening capacities of young people and institutions that have these responsibilities so that they can be part of propelling this forward is really important. For me here, the real call is there are partnerships and partnership opportunities. We all should be able to work together, private sector, public sector, and institutions in the middle like Agro that do provide an opportunity to link to farmers faster, so that we really come together and make sure that we make it easy for businesses to do business in this environment, but also for farmers to access the right products and the right technologies, and for consumers to access the right products. So thank you so much again for the opportunity. And again, I look forward to listening to others and to any questions you might have.